Elevate Women in Tech Breaking Taboos Around Women's Health series. My guest today is Joanne Monk OBE. Joanne is an independent consultant who is an advocate and speaker for the LGBTQ plus community. In this episode, Joanne will be sharing her lived experience as a transgender woman and her journey of transition from darkness to light. We will explore the intersections of identity, inclusivity, and empowerment in the workplace. So I think the best place for us to start, if that's okay, with you, Joanne, is if you could share a little bit with our audience about your background and your personal experience of transitioning from David to Joanne, and the challenges that you faced along the way.
Yep, I can certainly do that. I always, whenever I talk about my life, I always ask the question, how many people know what it's like to be transgender? And of course, the answer to that will be nobody, unless you are. And then I go on to talk about a tree. It can be any tree, doesn't matter what it is, but imagine a tree being planted when you're born. And over the years, that tree grows and its trunk and its branches will shape your characteristics, your strengths, your personality. And the roots of that tree will feed you for the rest of your life. However, for David, which is my birth name, and for transgender people as a whole, that imaginary tree was planted when David was born. And over the years, it would grow and its trunk and its branches would form David's characteristics, his strengths, his personality. But the roots of that tree were never his. They always belonged to Joanne. And she would essentially flood him with her thoughts, her emotions, and her desires until he released her from the prison that she was incarcerated in. To go back to that tree, the roots of that tree always belonged to Joanne, and she would fight David by flooding him with her thoughts and her emotions and her desires until he released her from the prison that she was incarcerated in. And that would take 58 years. Why? Because in the 1950s, when David was born, there was little or no understanding of what it meant to be transgender. The word wasn't in the dictionary. He knew from about the age of 5 that something was different, but he didn't really know what it was. His mother had a dressing up box of her old clothes, and children love dressing up. Even nowadays, children love dressing up. They love the pretend side of things. But for David dressed up because they were women's clothes, and he dressed in these clothes from about the age of 5, just wishing that he'd been born a girl. All his friends were girls. He had a couple of boyfriends at school, but he didn't like doing the things that other boys did, like climbing trees and getting muddy and playing football. He was very quiet. He was almost an introvert. He enjoyed primary school in Rugby in Warwickshire. And the one thing that he was good at was running. And looking back at David's early life, I wonder whether David was good at running because he was running away from something. He was running away from the fear of the unknown, what his life could be. To fast forward a little bit, grammar school, boys' grammar school, he was bullied constantly because I think other boys perceived him as being different. He was still dressing, still sneakily taking clothes from his mother's wardrobe and putting them on, and then very carefully putting them back exactly as he found them. But the bullying was a real problem, and that carried on right the way through grammar, and it resulted in David essentially not having the qualifications that he could have had things been different. And he left school after miserably failing A-levels and went to work on a farm. He was 19 then, and he'd left home, and by that time he was buying his own clothes. So he'd go into the local town, he'd buy his own clothes, but he'd buy them under the pretense of buying them from a girlfriend.
Right.
He never admitted that they were for him. And he used to go back to the little house cottage that he was living in, and obviously dressed, because that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a woman. He knew then that he should have been a woman. And that realization came probably from about the age of 8 or 9. He knew then that he should have been born a girl. Of course, Joanne was fighting him all the time. And David used to, I suppose, try and get rid of these thoughts by purging. And by purging, what he used to do is he used to light a fire in the garden of his cottage, and he used to put all the clothes on the fire, and he used to burn them, thinking that, yep, lovely, I've got rid of all the clothes, I've got rid of Joanne, that's it. But of course, that didn't happen. And what did happen was that Joanne came back even stronger, because I thinking about it, it was like a virus that David could never cure. And without the acceptance, because you don't choose to be transgender, without that acceptance, Joanne just grew stronger and stronger and stronger inside him. The initial result, and I put in a little trigger warning here for your listeners, because what happened next was that one morning David had left the cottage for work, and he found himself in the middle of a forest, nearby forest. Didn't know how he got there, didn't know what he was doing there. And it turned out, after consultation with doctors, that he was having a nervous breakdown because he couldn't handle everything that was going on inside him. And this is a big problem with a lot of transgender people's mental health issues. He was referred to a sexual psychologist in Birmingham, and basically he was told to go and read the magazines on the top shelf.
Oh, wow.
And that's what it was like. And that is not what he wanted to hear. His parents expected him to have girlfriends. They wanted him to get married. They wanted grandchildren, obviously. So David started dating girls, but he dated girls because he wanted to be like them rather than be with them.
Be with them, yeah.
If that makes sense. He met somebody at the age of 22, having left the farm where he was working and moving down to the south of England. And she caught him dressing and she put a knife to him. And the marriage ended instantly. And it was difficult times because David was still really fighting this enemy inside him. If you know, that's how I often describe it, as Joanne was like an enemy to him, you know, an enemy that he could never conquer, that was so strong. And I suppose looking on from there and bearing in mind what his parents wanted, he met somebody else. got married, and then his mum died, and this would be 40 years ago now. And just before she died, they had twin boys together, and the marriage was always rocky. David was dressing in all the time. He kept everything secret from his wife, from the two boys. But in a way, David stayed in that marriage out of a sense of guilt towards his wife, but an undying love towards his two boys. But inside, he was emotionally dying. He was physically dying. And it was a really tough life. In the year 2000, his wife died. Again, a very sad time for David. But in a way, maybe he thought that he could now be free to move on with life as he wanted it to be. But of course, it didn't happen, because he was still fighting Joanne. He was trying to do all the macho things. He'd taken roles as a volunteer firefighter. He'd taken roles as a special constable with the local police force, but none of these worked. They didn't give him, all right, they were perceived as macho roles at the time, but they didn't give David that strength of character to overcome what was really deep-seated, deeply rooted inside him, and that was Joanne. What happened next, and I'm going to throw in another trigger warning now, because what happened in the year 2014 is David went and sat on the edge of Beachy Head. For those people that don't know Beachy Head, it is a well-known beauty spot on the Sussex coast, very high cliffs, and known for people going there to take their lives. But David didn't go there really to take his life. He went up there to think, because it was a place where people went to look over their life, to try and explore how they could move on. And this is what David wanted to do. He wanted to try and understand what he had to do. But he was dragged back from the edge by two police officers, very compassionate, very understanding, talked to him. And a week later, it was if, I suppose, David lay down on the ground and somebody came along and undid a zip along the entire length of David's body, and out came Joanne. You see, David essentially had to die in order to let Joanne live. And that is when my life changed. I changed my name by deed poll. I took the name Joanne as a mix of my mother's names. She was Anne Josephine Monk, but nobody ever called her Anne. They used to call her Jo, short for Josephine. So that was my legacy from my mum. And she's looking down on me. She's my guardian angel, and I'm sure she's very proud of what I've achieved. As the daughter that she now has, I saw my GP, a very understanding GP. She put me on hormones. And after consultations at the gender clinic in London, I was allocated a surgery slot to have gender reassignment surgery, which I had. And whilst I was recovering at home, because it's major surgery, and had to take 3 months. And I suppose people say, or does it, all this surgery, is it actually warranted? But the cost of the surgery is offset by the fact that if I hadn't had it, I would have been in the mental health channel, and that would have cost considerably more. So whilst I was recovering at home, one of my boys came to see me and came in you know, can I get anything for you? Can I get some shopping for you? How are you? Blah, blah, blah. And then totally out of the blue, he said, is it okay if I call you mum now? That reduced me to tears. And whenever I talk about that, it does actually bring tears to a lot of people's eyes,
Yeah.
because it was so affirming.
Yeah.
You know, I never chose to be the way I am. I always was. It was just the point in my life when I had that acceptance, that understanding of who I should always have been. And for him to say that just made it was the ultimate affirmation of acceptance. My father was still alive. He wasn't so not so, I don't think keen's the word, but I had to go down. I drove down to Devon where he was living with my stepmom because he remarried. And he said, I'll never call you Joanne. You'll always be my son, but I understand. I'm pretty sure to this day, he's since passed away, but I'm pretty sure to this day that he knew.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I developed this passion. So that was a sort of from darkness to light. And I suppose if we're talking about the tree that I mentioned at the start, that tree was cut down when David had that acceptance.
Yeah.
It was cut down, but it wasn't dug up. It was cut down to the base. And Joanne grew her own tree with her own branches.
Like a rebirth of
It was
tree.
it is. It's like it was a rebirth. And
Yeah.
I suppose in a way I've been lucky to, it may be a funny way of putting it, but I've actually lived two lives.
Yeah, I can understand why you would put it into that analogy. And I think your analogy of the tree, I know we spoke before, really, I think for those that maybe don't understand it, it's a really good way to understand the journey that you've been on, and how, like you said, the roots were always Joanne. It was just when those roots were going to actually become that tree to who you are today. And I think, in terms of the story that you've shared, I think it's a courageous journey that you've been on. I think the way that you share and that what you've shared today, I'm hoping will help others to go on their own journeys if they're going through that transition process, or for those that might need to support someone who is about to who is transitioning. And I think it's an incredibly difficult and emotional process, all of the things that you've just shared, that journey that you've been on. And I think, it'd be great to understand, Joanne, from your opinion, what role for family members, friends, colleagues in the workplace, what role do they really play in supporting transgender individuals during that difficult time of that transition journey?
Well, that is a very, very big role. And it's, before I say that, if I can just bring in another analogy. You go to the supermarket, and you go down the canned vegetable aisle and you buy a can of peas to have with your Sunday roast. And you get back home, open the can, and there's carrots inside. Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with what's inside the can. There's nothing wrong with the label, but
Yeah.
a mistake happened. But at the end of the day, no amount of denial or stubbornness will turn those carrots into what the label said, peas. That is what it's like to be transgender. But how do you support them? The key thing is always allyship.
Yeah.
You have to be an ally. You have to, and I describe allyship by using the words, the letters from the word ally. So A is awareness.
Yeah.
So understanding and making yourself aware of the issues and the things that can affect minority communities. And it doesn't have to be transgender, it doesn't have to be LGBT, it can be any minority community. And then the first L is listen. and learn. So you listen to an individual's lived experience. You've listened to mine this afternoon, and I hope your listeners will be doing the same thing and taking on board what I've said. But then you learn from them. You learn what makes them different to what may appear to be the norm in inverted commas. And then the second L is leverage. So you leverage your privilege. And we've all got privilege. It might not be on such a high level as some other people, but we all have privilege in society. So leverage that privilege to educate others on what you've listened to and what you've learned in order to create a more inclusive culture.
Yeah.
And finally, why? Now, why is you. You as an individual. Empower yourself to shout out against the discrimination, the hate, and the issues that are faced across the board by any minority community. And that's what makes a good ally, by having all those things in place. And it's so important for people within the transgender community to have that support, have that allyship, have that support from families. And let's face it, they don't always get it.
No. But
certainly for organizations, for the workplace, when you have LGBT groups. I know a lot of organizations that have LGBT groups within the organization. They have champions of different aspects of diversity that are there for an individual to talk to, and maybe get signposted to an organization that will support them. But at the end of the day, if they don't get that support in the workplace, what happens? 49% of transgender people don't feel comfortable coming out in the workplace for fear of discrimination, for fear of hate, for fear of not being able to progress their careers, and for fear of ultimately losing their jobs.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that reference that you give to ally, that breakdown of that acronym, I can't say the word, acronym. I really love that awareness, listen and learn, leverage your privilege, and you. It's such a simple breakdown. So many people always say, how do I be an ally?
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy for people to relate to.
Yeah.
And when I give my talks and I do questions, I always have a question session at the end, and I do get asked some pretty awkward questions sometimes. But I always fire that one out myself, and I say, right, how many of you can remember what the letters ally stand for? And you'd be surprised at the number of people that actually do.
Yeah.
Because obviously when I give my talks, it's on a PowerPoint presentation anyway, so it's visual, as well as being verbal as I've done now. But it is easy to remember, and when you take that as an acronym, if you like, to describe how to be an ally, and then you refer back to the tree. Yeah.
It all starts to come together.
And then nicely, go back again to the can of peas that had carrots inside.
Yeah.
It all ties together. And I think when people understand that, because at the end of the day, we're human beings. And I mean, without saying too much about it, there's been a lot of politics recently, very negative politics against the transgender community, which actually are starting to worry me as well. I'm legally female, but I'm still worried because biologically I'm male, although my birth certificate says female. I'm legally female, but biologically I'm male. And if I have to go into hospital, who knows?
Yeah.
It's a massive debate at the moment. It is very worrying as well, and it's resulted in hate crime being increased. But you know what? I've fought for years to support the transgender community, to support organisations, to give my talks, tell people what it's like, and of course that resulted in. Because I am an independent advisor, so I got a Chief Constable's commendation for my work with Sussex Police. I won the diversity category for We Are the City's Top 100 Rising Star Awards in 2020. And then at the end of 2020, December, I got a brown envelope in the post. Oh, tax office, I'm not going to open that. I've had enough letters from the tax office in the past, and I know what they want. They want money. And I didn't open it, and found the side in my kitchen for about 2 weeks. And then I noticed that the envelope was handwritten, and it was really scruffy writing. And I thought, no, that's not the tax office. They wouldn't handwrite an envelope. So I opened it, and inside, obviously, there was a letter from the Honours Committee, and I know it word for word off by heart. And it said, "Dear Miss Monk, we are writing in the strictest confidence to inform you that you have been recommended to Her Majesty the Queen by the Prime Minister." A Conservative Prime Minister, let's point out. You've been recommended by the Prime Minister to Her Majesty the Queen for the honour of Officer of the Order of the British Empire for services to transgender equality as a global LGBT advocate and independent advisor. And it absolutely blew my mind away. I couldn't believe it.
I bet it did.
And it's very surreal, even now, to think that I've got that high an honour, because it is high. It's not not one of the lower ones. It is a high one. And I think there's only a couple of other people in the whole of the UK that have that high an honour for that category. And I might be the only one that has it specifically for that category, transgender equality as a global LGBT advocate. So has it changed my life? No. The only thing it did do is it did force me to buy a personal number plate for my car.
You're going to have to share what the number plate is then, Joanne.
Well, have a guess.
I'd assume it's got OBE in there. It's got to be there. Joe OBE, maybe?
It was Joe. Then when did I get it?
From the year that you said now, 20. You got
2021.
2021.
So it is what it is it's JO.
Yeah.
Joanne 21, which is when I got the OBE, and then OBE.
OBE. So everyone knows when you're coming into town then, and they know when you're about. I'll look out for it.
I've changed my car a couple of times, but I'll never get rid of that number plate.
Yeah. And it is such an honour to have achieved, and for anyone to achieve that, but for the work that you've done, I think for me, listening to you talk, and that's why I wanted to get you onto the podcast, was not only is your advice obviously so valuable and supportive, it's so simple to understand. The way that you get the audience to connect makes it in a way that it's not overly complex. You can really understand and think, okay, the tree analogy, the pea and carrot analogy, it just breaks it down into a way that makes things easy. And I think sometimes when we talk about these big topics, like when we talk about minority people within the in the workplace, in society, I think sometimes we just overcomplicate, and then the actual focus of what needs to be achieved can sometimes be missed. And I think when I speak to people in the workplace that are looking to be better allies, and to be a better person, sometimes they fear that they're going to get things wrong, so therefore they don't step up, they don't be that ally, they don't have that voice, because it's like, oh, if I get this wrong, I'm going to be in so much trouble. And I think if we could shift gears a little bit on this conversation, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about as well, obviously acceptance is so important for anyone who's minoritized. And I think, one of the things that, or one of the areas that I've spoken to people that are looking to be better allies to the LGBTQ community is proper use of pronouns, and particularly using pronouns, be it in the workplace or everyday life. So if you could explain maybe to our audience, why is it crucial for individuals to respect gender identities of preferred pronouns? And maybe share with us as well what to do when you get it wrong, because you know what, like you said, we're all human, and humans get things wrong. That just happens. So yeah, why should we respect pronouns, and how to correct yourself should you get yourself into that situation respectfully?
Well, I'm going to go the other way round. I'm going to answer the second question first. What happens when you get it wrong? And people do get it wrong. It's natural. And it's very often because they're used to seeing somebody identifying as a different gender. So they're so used to seeing that person before they changed. Change, I don't like using the word change. So mistakes do happen. But the first thing to do, apologize. It's simple. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
Acknowledge
say.
it.
I meant, acknowledge your mistake.
Yeah.
Because then that puts the individual at ease. Because misgendering is essentially a microaggression.
Yeah.
The microaggression is the very, shall we say, the lowest form of hate.
Yeah.
So it is important. Now, a lot of people use pronouns on their letterheads, they have little badges on. My pronouns are he, she. When you're in Teams meetings or meetings with people virtually, they share their pronouns on that. But what we've also got to remember is it's not just he, him, his, or she, her, hers. If you're talking about bisexual, it's they, theirs, them.
Yeah.
And it's very important, and it's not always easy. And I think the way to get round it is, if you're not sure, ask. It's
another simple way, isn't it?
So simple.
Yeah.
I mean, I never get misgendered. Certainly not now. My voice isn't anything like as masculine as it used to be, and I don't like putting pronouns after my name. If people can't recognize me as a woman, then that's their loss, not mine.
Yeah.
But if anybody does misgender me, I will correct them, and I do correct them with quite a firm attitude.
A stern response.
You can't say that, it isn't always easy. It's not always easy, certainly for people, if we're talking about the transgender community now, in the early stages of transition. And that can be for transgender women or transgender men.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to misgender transgender men.
Right.
They'll naturally have a female voice. So as you start going through hormonal treatment, then the voice lowers and things change.
Yeah.
So the crucial thing, certainly with pronouns, is if you're not sure, just ask. It's so easy.
Yeah. And again, it's that, like you said, it's those simple things that we can do to actually get things right,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we will get things wrong. But like you said, you get it wrong, acknowledge it. I made a mistake. I'm really
yeah,
sorry. And
yeah,
then make sure you don't then get it wrong again. Because I think,
yes,
I've
yeah,
heard some really disaster stories where, someone's been in a training session. This is one of the ones that I've heard. And in that training session, the person running the session kept getting the person's pronouns wrong, and really found it hard to correct themselves. And it was like, this is a you problem. The person has shared their pronouns at the very start. They've made it very clear who they are within the room. And then it's that
yeah,
acknowledging that actually you're the one making the mistake, and the
yeah,
individual in
yeah.
the end
But
left
then,
the
but
training
then,
session.
but then in that instance, Kelly, it's it's very often unconscious bias.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree.
They're so fixed on how they see somebody.
Yeah.
This bias, this unconscious bias, and we've all got unconscious bias. You've
Yeah.
got it, I've got it,
Yeah.
but it can be controlled, and it can be controlled by understanding what's going on in front of you, understanding a situation, understanding a lived experience, being an
Yeah.
ally. You can
Yeah.
start to learn to control unconscious bias, and then the problems that you may get with misgendering hopefully will diminish. I'm going to throw this one in because this one is on my on my business logo. So my business is From Darkness to Light and Beyond, and that's what my education business is called. And it's obvious why I chose that
Yeah.
title, because that is what happened from darkness to light and beyond. It
Yeah.
didn't just finish when I got to the light, it went further than that.
Yeah.
But underneath, I put this: whenever fear knocks on your door, always have the courage to open the door, because success is waiting beyond the fear.
I love that. That's a really nice way to sum it up. And like you said, it is the after, the beyond.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
and that's where you are now, isn't it? The
yeah,
beyond,
yeah.
and all of the
And that
fantastic work that you're doing.
can apply to anybody. When
Yeah.
we talk about, we get people talk about diversity, equality, and inclusion. It's not about diversity, equality, and inclusion. It's diversity, having a seat at the table. It's equality, having a voice. Inclusion, having that voice heard. But what have we forgotten?
Belonging.
Belonging.
Yeah.
It is incredible when you have an organization that supports all four: belonging, feeling a part of something, no matter who you are
Yeah.
or how you identify. That belonging is crucial. And you'll only get belonging if an organization is totally dedicated to supporting all minority communities within the DEI space. It's crucial. It's belonging. I feel that sense of belonging in society. I've had to work for it, but
Yeah.
I do feel that sense of belonging. And it's an incredible feeling.
I suppose it's the ultimate place for anybody that feels minoritized. That's that. And I always say this. So I've got two children that are of mixed race, and some of the lived experiences that they're going through now, they're only 12 and 9, are things that I can never experience, but I can support them with belonging. And they've experienced racism already, but they're things that through allyship and my
Yes,
awareness and
yes,
listening to their
yes,
experiences, it's
yes,
that journey that you go on. And I think the more that we can all be aware and really promote, like you say, that belonging. DEI is important, but without the belonging,
yes, yes,
it doesn't really embed, does it? And I think that's
no,
the key
no,
thing. And I think one of the things that started to see more I've started to see more coming through from the corporate realm, and I don't know what your thoughts are around this. So for companies and organizations to be better supporting all of their employees, and I think Tech Talent Charter did they recently released their diversity in tech report, and what was really great to see is that the data that's starting to be shared now around if we look at tech, 'cause obviously I talk a lot to the tech community,
Yeah.
the fact that we're starting to gather data that actually incorporates everybody. So their report actually had a section on, the UK tech sector has its 29% women and non-binary, 20% of software, 20% of that community is women and non-binary software engineers. And they included some information and some data this time round on the trans community as well. So we're really starting to see a shift towards recognition, that acknowledgement of the different, I suppose, the different identities that we have, the different intersections of people that we have as well, to
Yes.
really kind of support the change that's needed within some of the industries. And if we look at tech as an industry, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to really be able to support that within the space. So from your opinion, where do you think companies, organizations, how do they go beyond just looking at the data and really making it more inclusive? And do you know any specific policies or things that companies are doing particularly well? If you know in the tech industry, brilliant. If not, but just in general, it would be great to hear some
I
examples.
suppose I wouldn't want to name companies that are doing particularly well. I know some that are doing very, very well, but if I mention those, then it would be unfair on the others. I think the first thing is, when we're talking about any form of diversity, equality, inclusion, belonging, it has to be led from the top. It is no use having a diversity, equality, and inclusion policy if the CEO hasn't even read it.
Agreed. Yeah.
But that happens.
Yeah.
And,
It's just a checkbox.
and very often the CEOs haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
Sorry, any CEOs that are actually listening to this podcast. I don't direct it at individual, but it is absolutely crucial that diversity in the workplace is led from the top, that policies are led from the top, that training is put in place for particularly unconscious bias. It should be mandatory.
Yeah.
It is in some organisations, it's not in others. But again, it's no use having these training sessions if the people at the top haven't done them. They have to be a big part of it, because what happens then is you get the ripple effect.
Yeah.
So you throw a stone into a pond and you get little tiny ripples where it lands in the water. And as word gets out, or as the ripples move across the lake, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what it is when the CEOs get involved with understanding of DEI and minority communities. It's they're right in the centre. But by their understanding, they can then share that out to the rest of the organisation, to the staff, to the support teams, to their customers.
Yeah.
And the ripples get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it spreads out, and everybody then gets involved, and they want to get involved because they know that it's come from the top.
And that's when the true culture of an organisation becomes DNA, isn't it?
And we're in, June is typically Pride Month.
Yeah.
It's ironic because a lot of the prides aren't actually until July and August. Certainly down where I am in Sussex, Brighton Pride isn't until August. But we hear the word pinkwashing, where organisations try and take advantage of Pride Month to promote their businesses, essentially. But they do it for 1 month. And for the rest of the year, they forget about it. They couldn't care less about Pride. Pride is 365 days of the year.
100%.
24 hours a day, 100%. And there's a lot of organisations that aren't focused on that. It's getting better. It's getting a lot better. And, you know, I suppose, do you want me to name a couple of companies that I specifically think are really good?
If you feel comfortable to, I think it would be
Well,
great to
well,
shout about those doing well so people can check out what they're up to and what they're doing.
Lockheed Martin Aerospace
Okay.
is very good. And Lockheed Martin Aerospace is a global
Yeah.
company. So they're not only involved in manufacture, there's a lot of tech involved. And they are very, very inclusive, particularly to the LGBT community. And I've spoken to them, and they're very good. Another global organisation that is also very good is Sanofi Genzyme.
Okay.
Sanofi Genzyme is a global pharmaceutical company, and they're very inclusive as well. And on a local level, you know, I'm involved with ITV Meridian's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion panel. I was interviewed by them as one of their first community champions.
Right.
When you see organisations, it's really important for the media to get involved with minority communities. So they'll cover everything. They'll cover Disability Awareness Month. They'll cover Chinese New Year. You know, they'll cover Eid Mubarak and all the minority communities that they welcome. But it is important for the media to be seen to be inclusive. Sadly, it's not. Some of it can be very one-sided.
Yeah, it can be quite toxic and
can be very
negative.
toxic, and it doesn't take much for a well-known person to say something in the media, which then results in a lot of toxicity, a lot of hate towards certain minority communities. I'm not going to go into anything else, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I agree. And I think with that, obviously, there's, like you mentioned, Lockheed Martin, Sanofi, Genzyme. Obviously, they're doing really great things. If there was a CEO listening to this now, or a senior leader, and they're thinking, we want to do more, we want to make sure that our policies are more inclusive. They might be covering some areas of minoritized group, but maybe not all. They maybe even haven't thought about how to support a trans community because they're probably thinking, well, we don't have any trans community within our workplace because they're just not aware. What would be some of the initial steps that if an organisation really wanted to think about how they can increase their diversity, equality, inclusion, and like you said, the belonging side, what would be some top 3 tips that you would share to say, think about this?
I'll share a free tip, but it'll actually cost them in the end, because that is get me in and I'll talk to them. I will 100%. Give my presentation. My presentation takes around about 3/4 of an hour.
Yeah.
And it covers not only my life and what I've achieved afterwards, it covers allyship, it covers intersectionality, and it covers a little bit about unconscious bias, but that's a very in-depth subject that needs completely separate training. But I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about inclusion, certainly from the transgender community in the workplace. And the chances are that the organisation will have somebody in it that's transgender. They just don't know.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the bit where the work needs to be done. It's about enabling all of their workforce to really be their true selves and be able to be themselves and turn up and show up as themselves. Because I'm sure when you was David, it must have been so tiring and exhausting because you always knew that Joanne was there. And I think that's the bit that we need to work on. And the more we can all be allies to enable people to be themselves and empower them to be the person they want to be, then it just takes so much pressure off people, all that hardship, all of that what they're holding on to them, not being able to be themselves. It's a challenging time.
It is, and it is down to education.
Yeah.
You know, you can't, you know, I go on to this thing about fear, you know, whenever fear knocks on your door, and a lot of the transgender community won't open that door.
Because of fear of what might
Because
happen, fear of retribution.
What will happen if they do open the door.
Yeah.
So it's in a way it's counteractive. It's not always easy to open that door. You know, and there's a lot of transgender people out there that just don't want to come out in the workplace.
Yeah.
They don't want to come out in the workplace because of how they're going to be treated. And this is why it's important to have, you know, and there are a lot of people that'll give talks, not similar to mine, but there are people out there that'll give talk. I'm more than happy. I'll talk to anybody.
Yeah.
I'm currently negotiating with Cunard to talk on the ships.
Should be amazing.
Which, that I think that would be the pinnacle of my talking career if I pull that one off. But I have had an endorsement for that as well. So
but I think it's the more we talk.
Important. But I mean, it's interesting because, you know, an organisation like Cunard and a lot of the travel industry, you know, if you look at the airlines, the different airlines, there's been an LGBT or certainly LGB community within those organisations for a jolly long time. It's how we bring about having that understanding that it's not just LGB, it's LGBT. And getting people and organisations to accept that the transgender community, we're not there to hurt anybody. You know, we just want to get on with our lives.
Just want to be
we just want to. It's, you know, we're all human beings at the end of the day. We're all human beings. We all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect because it's a basic human right.
Agreed. I completely agree. I think you've given so many great examples, suggestions, obviously sharing your own story on your transition from darkness to light. And obviously that's the episode title today. I think before we finish up our talk, I think I could talk to you for hours, to be honest with you, Joanne, but before we finish up, is there any final advice or message that you'd like to share to our listeners, particularly those that are potentially struggling with their gender identity, or those seeking to be better allies?
I think for those people struggling with their identity, there may be a cost to pay when you have that acceptance, but you will never be happy unless you accept who you really are. You can fight it and fight it and fight it, and it's the same for lesbian, it's the same for gay, it's the same for bisexual. You are born with it. At some point in your life, you will have that acceptance and that understanding of who you are, and then you will move forward. You will move into the light. But there may be costs to pay. I was lucky. I didn't lose out on anything. But there's always people to talk to. There's always organisations that will listen to you, that will help you. For the transgender community, the Stonewall, there's even the Samaritans. For transgender children, certainly in my area, there's an organisation called All Sorts, as in Bassett's licorice, but it's not what it's called. Don't be frightened to, I suppose my advice would be, the only way you're going to move forward is by talking to somebody about it. Now, it's either a best friend, somebody that you can confide in, somebody that you can trust. If you're lucky enough to work in an inclusive organisation, the chances are they'll have an LGBT
Champion,
group that
yeah.
meet once a month or so. Go to the meeting,
Yeah.
you know, talk to somebody there, because they're in that group, because they're part of the community. They're not going to shun you because you suddenly turned up and said, oh, I think I might be transgender, I think I might be bisexual. They're not going to push you out. They'll welcome you with open arms.
Definitely. And I think what we'll do as well, we'll share some of those organisations that you've mentioned on the show notes. We'll pop some of those in so people can have ways to connect to organisations that can truly support. And then finally, for those looking to be or seeking to be better allies, any final tips? I think I know what you're going to say, but I want it to come from your mouth, not mine. What would you say to the allies?
What would I say to the allies? Listen, learn.
Definitely, 100%.
Because unless you listen, unless you learn from an individual lived experience, you will never be an ally.
Yeah.
I'm an ally.
Yeah.
I don't actually identify as transgender, but I'm an ally. I'm an ally to the disabled community, to the BAME community, to the Gypsy Roma traveller community. You name it, I'm an ally, because although I'm from a minority community, I will actively support anybody in other minority communities.
Yeah.
I will also support gender equality. I'm female, and I will fight for the rights of other women to have that gender equality, particularly in the workplace. So I'm an ally to that as well.
Yeah.
We can all be allies.
Do you know what? We all could be allies, and we all 100% should be allies.
Yeah.
And I think when we raise our awareness and truly look and listen, as you say, and start to learn, then you really realise how some of these minoritized groups and the challenges that they face, because you can try to relate, but you can never live their experience because you're just not in their shoes.
No.
And I think the more that we can be aware, I think the better this world will be. And I think there's a lot of different challenges going on in the world. And I think, this is one way that I think we can make the world a better place for all. And I'm a big advocate for allyship and understanding your privilege, because like you said, we all have it. Even if you feel, and even if you are a minoritized group, you have privilege of some sort that you can use to support someone else. And that's one thing that I've come to understand and learn through my lived experiences and jobs and things like that. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for that. Thank you enough, Joanne, for sharing your powerful story, your insights, your lived experience of the journey that you've been on. And I think your courage and advocacy are truly inspiring. I think our listeners, I'm sure there's a lot that they've taken from today's conversation. And I think, what we've talked about today, it's about creating more inclusive and an accepting world. That's ultimately what I think just needs to happen, where every individual can truly live their authentic life unapologetically, as their true selves. And I think that's what I would love to see, a world where that can be. And I'm sure that's something that you would love to see as well. So thank you very much for joining us today.